June 1950. Fighting vehicles. Proving establishment, Chertsey, Surrey. A squat four-wheeled machine rolls off a transport truck for its first official trials. It weighs less than 4 tons. Its armour would barely stop a rifle round. And the British Army is about to bet its Scout Car doctrine on it. The vehicle is a Ferret. Within 2 decades, over 4,400 will roll off the production line. They will fight in Malaya, Aden, Borneo, Cyprus, Northern Ireland, and eventually Kuwait. They will serve with more than 30 nations across 5 continents. And when its replacement finally arrived, the Ferret kept deploying alongside it for nearly 2 more decades. But what made this tiny Scout Car so successful was not some revolutionary new technology. It was the opposite. The Ferret succeeded because British engineers refused to abandon what already worked. Every critical system, from the transmission to the suspension to the drive layout, came directly from Britain's greatest armoured car of World War II. The Ferret was not just inspired by the Daimler armoured car. It was its direct evolutionary descendant, carrying forward engineering principles that had proven themselves from North Africa to Northwest Europe. This is the story of how wartime excellence became Cold War dominance. The Daimler armoured car had set an almost impossible standard. When it entered service in 1941, it became the first British armoured car designed to mount a tank turret, carrying the same 40mm 2-pounder gun as the Tetrarch light tank. With 52 rounds of ammunition and a coaxial Bisa machine gun, it could engage enemy armour rather than simply observe and report. But firepower was only part of what made the Daimler exceptional. 3 innovations transformed it from adequate to outstanding. First, the Wilson preselector gearbox connected through a fluid flywheel. There was no clutch pedal. Drivers selected their next gear in advance, then simply pressed a pedal to engage it. This eliminated the skill barrier that made conventional armoured vehicles difficult to drive under combat stress. Second, the H-drive layout placed a central differential, with parallel drive shafts running to each wheel through epicyclic reduction gears in the hubs. Instead of sitting atop conventional axles, the hull dropped down between the suspension units. The result was a dramatically lower silhouette than any comparable vehicle. Third, dual driver controls at the rear meant the commander could drive backwards at full combat speed. All 5 gears worked identically in reverse. When an ambush went wrong, a Daimler crew did not have to turn around. They simply drove away facing their attackers. Combat validated every innovation. The 11th Hussars first took Daimlers into action at El Alamein in 1942, exploiting breakthroughs to pursue retreating Axis forces. When fitted with the Little John Squeeze bore adapter in northwest Europe, the 2-pounder could penetrate 80mm of armour at 500 metres, threatening the flanks of German tanks. Winston Churchill himself was photographed in a Daimler at Xanten, Germany in 1945. Production reached 2,694 armoured cars, alongside 6,626 of the smaller Daimler Dingos. The design proved so successful that it outlasted its planned replacement. The Coventry armoured car was curtailed at only 220 vehicles of 1,700 planned, while Daimler production continued until the war's end. By 1946, Britain recognised that the ageing Dingo needed replacement. The vehicle had served brilliantly, but it was cramped, underpowered, and lacked the communications equipment modern reconnaissance demanded. In 1947, the British Army issued a formal General Staff requirement for a new light reconnaissance and liaison vehicle. The specification demanded 4-wheel drive configuration, a low silhouette, improved cross-country mobility, and critically, a maximum width of 8 feet. This last requirement came directly from operational experience in Malaya, where counterinsurgency patrols needed vehicles that could manoeuvre between rubber plantation rows. Anything wider was useless in the terrain that mattered most. The contract went to Daimler of Coventry in October 1948. It was the obvious choice. The same engineering team that had created the Dingo, led by Sidney Shellard, would design its replacement using the same Radford Works facilities. The first prototype arrived at Chertsey in June 1950. Trials focused on cross-country performance, armour configuration, and suspension behaviour, resulting in corrections before acceptance. Production began in mid-1952. Notably, the turreted Mark II reconnaissance version entered service before the open-topped Mark I liaison variant. The Army wanted armed scouts immediately. Liaison vehicles could wait. The Ferret carried forward every critical Daimler innovation while addressing the Dingo's limitations. The H-drive layout remained the signature feature. A central differential fed parallel drive shafts to each wheel through tractor, constant velocity joints, and epicyclic reduction gears in the hubs. This configuration was essential for handling the dramatically more powerful engine without destroying the driveline. The pre-selector 5-speed epicyclic gearbox connected through a fluid coupling, with all gears available in reverse exactly as in the Daimler. A novice driver could operate the Ferret effectively within hours. There was no clutch to burn, no gears to grind. The transmission forgave mistakes that would have crippled conventional vehicles. Independent coil spring suspension using pairs of transverse links mirrored the wartime design, providing excellent cross-country mobility while maintaining the low profile that kept crews alive. What changed reflected Cold War requirements. The Rolls-Royce B60 Mark VI-A engine, a 4,256 cubic centimetre inline-six producing 129 brake horsepower, nearly tripled the Dingo's power output. The driver relocated from offset right to centre position, creating a roomier hexagonal fighting compartment. Combat weight increased from approximately 3 tons to between 3.7 and 4.4 tons depending on variant. According to crew accounts, the Ferret was much noisier than the Dingo. The switch from true monocoque to welded steel construction sacrificed some acoustic stealth for structural strength, but what it lost in silence, it gained in versatility. The stronger hull could mount a proper turret with a 360-degree rotating weapon station. The Mark II/III became the most common variant, featuring an enclosed turret with a .30 caliber Browning machine gun and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. Armour thickness ranged from 6 to 16 millimeters, sufficient to defeat shell splinters and deflect rifle caliber rounds at point-blank range. Performance specifications reflected the Scout philosophy. Top road speed reached 93 km per hour. Range extended to 306 km from the 96-litre fuel tank. The vehicle could ford just under 1 metre unprepared, or 1.5 metres with preparation. The engine ran fully submerged. Dimensions kept the Ferret manoeuvrable in tight spaces. Length measured 3.835 metres. Width came in at 1.905 metres, well under the 8-foot plantation row requirement. Height with turret stood at 1.879 metres. Ground clearance reached 330 millimetres with a turning radius under 6 metres. Experienced crews knew the drivetrain's dangers. Driving above the Army's 40-mile-per-hour limit could cause wind-up in the transmission, potentially loosening the wheels catastrophically. As one veteran owner warned, the wheel will continue forward while the Ferret grinds to a halt and likely turns over. The speed limit was not bureaucratic caution, it was survival guidance. The Ferret family eventually comprised 16 submodels across 5 main marks. The Mark I series served as liaison vehicles with open tops, carrying a Pintle-mounted Bren-light machine gun with a 2-man crew. The Mark I/1 added thicker side and rear hull plates plus a sealed hull for deep fording. The Mark II series were the turreted reconnaissance variants. Beyond the standard Mark II/III, the Mark II/6 added 4 Vickers Vigilant anti-tank guided missiles. This wire-guided weapon could penetrate between 550 and 576 millimeters of armor at ranges up to 1,375 meters, transforming a scout car into a tank killer. The Mark IV and V big-wheel variants featured larger tires, 381mm vacuum-assisted disc brakes replacing the original drums, and permanently attached flotation screens for amphibious capability. The Mark V mounted 4 BAC swing-fire missiles with 4,000-meter range in an aluminium-armoured turret, plus 2 reload missiles. What began as a liaison vehicle had evolved into a genuine anti-armour platform. Against its Cold War rivals, the Ferret offered distinct advantages and accepted deliberate trade-offs. The Soviet BRDM-2 featured full amphibious capability via waterjet propulsion, heavier armament with a 14.5mm heavy machine gun plus coaxial 7.62, and unique chain-driven belly wheels for crossing trenches. But the Ferret offered a lower profile, superior mechanical reliability, and better crew protection for the gunner through its enclosed turret versus the exposed position on early BRDM variants. The French Panhard AML was directly derived from the Ferret. After purchasing 200 Ferrets in 1956 for successful use in Algeria, French engineers made a thorough and detailed examination of the British design before creating the AML. The result was equally light and small, but mounted a 60mm mortar or 90mm gun. This reflected different doctrinal approaches. The French emphasized aggressive reconnaissance. The British emphasized observe and report. Against the American M8 Greyhound and its successors, the Ferret was half the weight at 4 tons versus 8.2 tons. It was significantly smaller, lower, and more manoeuvrable with run-flat tyres standard. The M8 offered superior firepower with its 37mm cannon and greater range at 563 km versus 306. But in Malayan mud and European forests, ground pressure mattered more than range. The lighter vehicle went where heavier scouts could not. Now, before we get into the Ferret's combat record, if you are enjoying this deep dive into British engineering, consider subscribing. It takes a second and helps the channel grow. Alright, let us see what happened when this vehicle met the enemy. The Malayan emergency shaped the Ferret's specifications and provided its first operational test. From 1948 to 1960, British and Commonwealth forces fought communist insurgents in dense jungle and rub plantations. The 28th Commonwealth Brigade used ferrets for convoy escort along vulnerable road networks, perimeter defence of artillery positions, and counter-insurgency patrols. The 8-foot width requirement paid immediate dividends. Ferrets could manoeuvre between plantation rows where Saladins and larger armoured cars could not operate. The Mark 1/2 variant was specifically built for counter-insurgency patrols during this campaign, featuring a fixed turret with armoured roof for protection against ambush fire from elevated positions. Aden brought the Ferret into urban combat between 1963 and 1967. The 1st Queen's Dragoon Guards and 4th Royal Tank Regiment provided convoy escort and armoured support to infantry patrols in increasingly hostile conditions. The Arab police mutiny on 20th of June 1967 tested the vehicle's protection limits. According to regimental accounts, a Ferret accompanied a Saladin to investigate an ambush site in Crater District. The patrol came under such intense fire that paint started to flake off the armour from bullet impacts. NCO Rod Blenkarn became a documented Ferret casualty when a sniper squeezed around through the open flap he was peering out of. The Borneo confrontation from 1962 to 1966 demonstrated what the Ferret could not do. Veterans of the 4th Royal Tank Regiment recalled that the topography was totally unsuited for any other sort of armoured car activity, as movement off the road was virtually impossible. The dense jungle and limited road network confined Ferrets to convoy escort and hearts and minds liaison work. They protected what they could reach, but they could not reach much. Northern Ireland saw Ferrets deployed from 1969 through the 1970s. Local residents nicknamed them Daleks due to the turret-mounted Browning, and authorities eventually deemed them too provocative for street patrols. After 1973, they operated mainly in rural areas where their presence drew less hostility. The vehicle designed for jungle reconnaissance found urban counterinsurgency politically unsuitable, regardless of its tactical capabilities. Export customers fought harder wars with their Ferrets than Britain ever did. The Nigerian Civil War from 1967 to 1970 provided the most documented export combat. Time magazine reported federal forces launching attacks with English made Ferret and Saladin armoured vehicles toward the Biafran capital of Enugu. In the absence of widely distributed anti-tank weapons, the combination of firepower, protection, and mobility completely outmatched foot-mobile Biafran forces. Armoured cars were battle winners in this conflict, but Biafran forces adapted. Their Ogbonigwe rocket weapons eventually proved effective in knocking out Nigerian Army Saladin and Ferret armoured cars. The Imperial War Museum holds a photograph of destroyed Ferret registration N3062 following the Abagana ambush in 1968. What worked against infantry failed against improvised anti-armour weapons. Rhodesia's Bush War from 1964 to 1979 saw approximately 20 to 30 Ferrets serve with the reformed Rhodesian Armoured Corps. Troops nicknamed them George. Some were modified with 20mm Hispano-Suiza anti-aircraft guns for increased firepower. During Operation Eland on 9th August 1976, 4 Ferrets participated in a cross-border raid into Mozambique alongside Silu scouts, resulting in approximately 1,000 enemy casualties according to Rhodesian accounts. Cyprus peacekeeping from 1964 onward produced actual combat documentation. Canadian Department of National Defence photographs show Ferrets firing at Turkish positions and taking return fire during the 1964 intercommunal violence. The Royal Canadian Dragoons and Fort Garry Horse operated UN-painted vehicles throughout the deployment, with 26 Canadian Ferrets serving with UNFI CYP in 1965. Operation Granby in 1991 provided the Ferret's final British deployment, 40 years after production began. 4 vehicles formed Ferret Force, providing close protection to the Queen's Royal Irish Hussars regimental headquarters. The QRH Museum preserves the story of Tulliard, a Mark I Plus crewed by Warrant Officer Class 1 J.C. Muir and Corporal Desmond Black. Coincidentally, Both men came from the same townland in County Tyrone, Ireland. During the ground offensive, Ferrets led armoured columns through the breach into Iraq under cover of darkness. When regimental headquarters came under friendly machine gun fire, the benefit of having a Mark I Plus with the turret soon became evident. The enclosed fighting position protected the crew while they identified and resolved the blue-on-blue incident. Tulliard struck 2 mines during the advance. An anti-personnel mine caused minimal damage. A larger mine caused somewhat more damage to a front-wheel station and tyre. The Ferret became momentarily airborne, but thankfully the crew were uninjured. They continued the advance. On one occasion, 2 Ferrets and their crews corralled 147 prisoners of war, searching and disarming them before evacuation rearward. Vehicles designed for reconnaissance had become prisoner handlers through necessity and opportunity. The Ferret served the British Army from 1952 until its final Gulf War deployment in 1991. 39 years of frontline service. Replacement by the FV-721 Fox began in May 1973, but only 325 Fox armoured cars were built before that program ended in 1993. The Ferret nearly outlasted its own replacement. Total production reached 4,409 vehicles across 16 submodels. Export customers included nations across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. As of 2025, Ferrets remain active with Cameroon, Central African Republic, Indonesia, Kenya, and ceremonially with the Royal Malaysian Police and Sri Lanka Armoured Corps. Remarkably, video emerged in 2025 of a Ferret Mark I with added drone defences operating in Ukraine, supplied through privately funded donations. A vehicle designed in the late 1940s continues serving in 21st century combat. The Daimler Armoured Car proved that innovative engineering could compensate for light armour and modest firepower. The Ferret proved that successful designs deserve evolution rather than replacement. Sidney Shellard's team did not chase revolutionary concepts. They refined what worked. The H-drive layout, pre-selector gearbox, and independent suspension that made the Daimler exceptional served equally well from Malayan plantations to Kuwaiti deserts. When the shooting started, a Ferret could still reverse at full combat speed, exactly as its ancestor had done 40 years earlier. 4,409 built, 30 nations served, 39 years of British Army service, and somewhere in Ukraine, the engineering principles that Sidney Shellard perfected in wartime Coventry are still keeping crews alive. The Ferret has become one of the most popular collector military vehicles worldwide. Civilians can legally own and road register them in both Britain and America. Prices range from £6,000 to £9,000 for Mark I and Mark II variants in the United Kingdom, with big wheel Mark IVs commanding around £15,000. Several hundred survive in private hands, maintained by enthusiast organisations including the Military Vehicle Trust and the Daimler Ferret Owners Group. Museum examples preserve the combat history. The Tank Museum at Bovington, the Imperial War Museum, the RAF Museum, and the QRH Museum all maintain Ferrets in their collections. Tulliard, the Gulf War veteran, remains at the QRH Museum with its mine damage and combat record intact. The Ferret was never the most heavily armed or thickly armoured scout car of the Cold War, but it was fast, reliable, easy to maintain, and optimised for British reconnaissance doctrine. Observe, report, and survive to do it again tomorrow. That was exactly what it was designed to do.